All right, first off, I want to thank you all for completing your Friday attendance marker, watching the lecture, doing all that stuff. Everybody did it, so I really appreciate everybody getting that done. Some of you are still missing a few homework assignments. I saw a few out there that are still missing. If you have not completed those, you need to do so as soon as you can. Because I'm going to give a little grace this first week to try to get everybody going. But you need to get those things done just as soon as you possibly can. Okay? Missing one, get out there and do it. Now, in my lecture that you guys watched on Friday, we talked about the Spanish. We talked about how the Spanish created an empire here. We talked about how the Spanish beat the Aztecs and beat the Inca. They create a system, a colonial system. Okay? And they become the envy of the rest of Europe because they have silver, they have a trading system, and the rest of Europe, which is lagging a little bit behind, is now jealous of what the Spanish have and want what the Spanish have. In that lecture, I mentioned a thing called mercantilism. You guys remember that? If you did, go back and look for it. Because mercantilism is a big deal. Okay? It is, in some ways, what's going to drive the ship here for the rest of these countries to try to get here. Okay? They need to. Mercantilism is this economic system where your country tries to become self-sufficient. And the other way that you can do that is to increase your holdings of gold and silver, to develop a favorable balance of trade, which means you import more than you export. Okay? That you need markets, you need colonies because you can get raw materials from colonies cheaper than anywhere else, and then once you manufacture whatever goods you're trying to get from those raw materials, you can sell them right back to the colonies. So you have markets, you have raw materials, you have all of these things. As we move into chapter 2 takes us to England. We already have the Spanish over here. We'll add the French a little bit later on. But we have to focus on England. Okay? And today is going to sound a little bit like European history. Okay? It's going to sound like a Western Civ class. We have to set the stage. Okay? And Mr. Stewart and I, who are teaching the same class right now, we always talk about this, that it takes time away from what we would like to do in American history, but if you don't understand what happens here, you don't really understand why English show up. It's complicated. Difficult, but you got to understand a little bit of background here to figure out where we go next. Okay? That first objective up there is really the key. Identify the economic, political, and religious motivations for the establishment of England's diverse American colonies. The religion issue is the key one. The economics we can kind of figure out. That's mercantilism. They want to do what Spanish and other people have been doing. That should not surprise you at all. But political, the religious, a little bit different. And these are the key to really understanding what's going to happen next for the English. To understand what happens, I have to go back in time a little bit to really about 200, 150 or so years before the English arrived, or even before Columbus set sail. Because we have to go back and take a look at a period of time in European history called the Reformation. Okay? Now, the Reformation is going to center around this person, Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a very bright, very intelligent, very well educated German boy. Okay? His father was fairly well to do, and he had encouraged Martin Luther to go to school, had means to send Martin Luther to school, and he wanted Martin Luther to really take over his interests, better his family, whatever. Because you got it in the 1400s, the late Middle Ages, getting to the Renaissance, really all that other stuff. To get an education, you have two choices. Okay? You go to cathedral schools and become a priest, or you go to university, which was really just now developing. Okay? So some of the early universities in Italy and in England, they don't really develop until the 1300s, okay, into the early 1400s. So the university education is pretty rare. Martin Luther very well educated. So studying really to perhaps even be a lawyer. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes the best laid plans don't often go the way we want them to. Martin Luther gets caught out in a storm one day, a bad storm. He's afraid that he's going to die. And in the midst of this storm, really fearing for his life, he cried out to God to save him. And the storm abated. And Martin Luther believed that a miracle had taken place, and that God had saved him. So, believing that he should do something to show his thankfulness to God, he really gives up his academic career and joins a monastery and becomes a monk. Well, Martin Luther's brothers in the monastery realized that Martin Luther had a real talent, and that he couldn't just stay cooped up in a monastery. It would be good. And so they encouraged him to go to the local university in the part of Germany that Martin Luther was from, in Wittenberg, and to start teaching. And so Martin Luther eventually becomes really a university teacher. And he teaches about religion. Now, Martin Luther's favorite class, and really the class that really a lot of the students kind of flocked to, Martin Luther did a lot of research and a lot of writing and a lot of teaching about the letters of Paul. The New Testament, Paul is one of the kind of late arriving disciples to Jesus, and but becomes one of the most important, probably the most important disciples, because he's the one that takes Christianity to the Gentiles. The letters of Paul also give the early Christian church a structure, a little bit of theology. And so Martin Luther's class centered a lot on Pauline beliefs and Pauline theology. Paul, for example, could not go out and convert people to Judaism first and then have them convert to Christianity. And so Paul developed really this theological base of Christianity, that Christianity is a religion of faith. In order to become a Christian, what must you believe? Okay? That Jesus was divine, that Jesus sacrificed himself for the sins of others. And if you believe that, then what? Yes, and your reward becomes what? Eternal life. Okay? So it's a religion of salvation. It's a religion of faith. Okay? It requires you to believe what scientifically can't happen. Okay? No one can be crucified and rise from the dead unless they are something supernatural, something divine. So Paul says and teaches his students that we have to take that on faith. Okay? It is what we have to do. We have to believe that this is what happened. All right. So we know what Martin Luther is, and we know what he does. But at the same time that Martin Luther is doing this stuff, the Catholic Church itself, okay, the body that he is a part of, okay, the establishment, the structure, the religious structure that he is a part of, has terrible problems Okay? And these problems date back even further. If we went back to the Catholic Church of 1300s or so, there were a couple of key problems inside of the church. Okay. Okay. One is corruption. Okay. One is corruption. The church had some problems. Okay. The church raised money. The church is a huge consumer of art, of culture. It needed money continuously. And so to raise money, the church oftentimes went through practices. One of the most noticeable, okay, the one that's going to play into our hands is the one you see up there second, indulgences. Okay. In the late 1400s, early 1500s or so, while Martin Luther was teaching at Wittenberg in Germany, the Pope in Rome issued a directive that allowed the church to sell indulgences. Essentially, you could pay, as an individual, you could pay a certain sum of money to pay your way out of the consequences of that sin, whatever it may be, okay, to allow you to go straight to heaven without having to pay for that sin. Martin Luther, curious about this. Why? Why? You're right, but why? There you go. Okay. You can't pay your way into heaven. What does Luther tell his students? The only way to get you to eternal life is what? Faith and belief. You can't pay. You can't do these things. You have to believe. Okay? It's a mixed message, right? What's the church say? Well, you pay enough money. Okay. Luther is curious about this. Luther thinks. Think about this. Okay? Luther thinks the institution that he's a part of is deceiving all of them. Okay? What if you believe in the Pope here? If you go and take your life fortune and you buy all these indulgences and you die the next day and God casts you out. Because what? You didn't believe, right? But the Pope said it's like this. Okay? I try to tell you guys something, humorous about this, to kind of give you an idea about what we're talking about. Okay? I was up here early, okay? And I was over in the other room. So you come in, you look around, you don't see anybody, you don't see me, okay? And you're like, he's not here, I'm leaving, okay? So you take off down the stairs, and all of you are coming in, and you see her, and you say, hey, where you going? Oh, he's not there. So we're not having class. So you guys all skip class. I come rolling in here at 9 o'clock. None of you were here. Okay. I decided to give a pop test worth 1,000,000 points, which you all get zeros on, and fail. Who are you mad at? You're mad at her, right? Because she led you astray. Who should you be mad at? Yeah. Because you should have gone and checked, right? And so Luther is, look, you got to understand the situation here. The Catholic Church controls the message. Okay? Most religious writings at that time, virtually all of them were written in Latin. How many of you can read Latin? And that's kind of the same thing. How many of the uneducated population of Europe could read Latin, right, in the early 1500s? Okay. Look, I think I didn't take a year of Latin when I was in 8th grade. All right? Horrible. Do I remember any of it? Just the pain of it. But yeah. Okay. So the problem is, okay, that the church is really embroiled in some religious controversy. Well, that's not bad enough. The church is also embroiled in some political controversy too. Okay? Throughout the Middle Ages, there's been a real battle going on about who's the real power in Europe. Is it the kings who control the political world, or is it the Pope who controls the spiritual world? Okay? During the 1300s, the king of France actually succeeded in some ways in bringing the papacy under his control. In the 1300s, the Pope, one of the popes, moved the residence of the Pope from Rome to southern France, Avignon. Okay? And so a lot of people look around and say, hey, wait a minute. Okay? If Clement is living in Avignon, then bringing up the son of the French king, who's in charge of the church? Is it the Pope, or is it the French king? And so a lot of other leaders in Europe were very critical of the Pope. Wanted the Pope to leave Avignon and move back to Rome. Inside of the church, deep inside of the church, there is a growing reform movement. Okay? It hasn't been super successful, but they do eventually succeed in getting the Pope to move back to Rome. But in the meantime, when they're trying to do this, it causes this. Okay? In 1377, Pope Gregory decided that he wanted to move the papacy back to Rome. Okay? When Gregory died, not too long after that, the cardinals didn't like the new Pope in Rome, so they just decided to elect their own Pope and put him in Avignon. Oh, now what do you have? Two popes. Well, that's not good. Okay? And so you can't do that. So there's this huge sort of theological and debate about what's going on here. So the solution is the two popes agree to retire. And then they'll elect a new pope, and a new pope can take over. All right? So the church council elects a third pope. What do the other two popes say? Well, like him, so we're staying. Now you have three. This is a disaster. Okay? This is a public relations disaster. It causes a lot of people to question really the leadership of things. Now remember, 100 years earlier, I was telling you the Pope almost looked co-equal to kings, right? Now what they look like a bunch of Keystone Cops, right? They're fumbling and bumbling around, and they don't know what's going on. If you need reform, now might be the time to do it. Okay? And so all of these kind of calls for reform happen, you guys can see, right after the schism, the great schism, we had the three popes. So look up there, okay? Wycliffe, Huss, and Erasmus, all right, all began to call for reform from the church. Okay, notice the dates. They're all towards the end of that period, okay? So when you get to Erasmus here, attacking the corruption of the church. You're starting to move towards the time of Martin Luther. Okay, Martin Luther was born in 1483 or so. Okay, so you're starting to get into that time. Now remember, Martin Luther's kind of a little bit ticked off too. And so Luther gets in on the act, okay, and decides to criticize the church himself, building on what others have done, like okay. Luther decides to add his voice, okay. And Luther is critical of indulgences. We already told you he didn't like those, okay. And so he will come up with 95 objections based on his reading of Scripture. Remember, he's very well educated. Okay? So he goes to the text and says, I have found in the text 95 places, essentially where it says you can't buy your way into heaven. Okay? That indulgences are wrong. So he tacks those 95 objections up on the church door at Wittenberg for everybody to see, but he also sends it to the Pope. He sends it to the bishop, actually. Okay. So Luther sends his objection. In the beginning, the Pope thinks that Luther is some drunken priest that's had too much wine, and got ticked off and fired this thing off. Kind of like sometimes you do when you get mad, you send off an email, and 5 minutes later you're like, oh, I probably should have said that, or text or whatever. Okay. So that's kind of what the Pope thinks, and at any day now, Luther's going to be saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, blah, blah, blah. He did. The problem, in the past, 100 years before, let's say Luther had been writing, all right, at the time of Wycliffe, right? Then you would have seen the Pope quash this, and you would never heard anything about it, okay? And everything would have been fine. And nobody would have been the wiser. But something has been invented by this time. What is it? Look at these 95 pieces up there. What are they? They're not handwritten. They're what? Printed. Okay? The printing press has been invented, which means that instead of the old way of producing books where monks basically had to sit down and write them all out by hand, printers now can print multiple copies of books at one time. So instead of being able to quash what Luther had written, was the Pope suddenly find himself that everybody's doing what? Everybody's reading this, right? And then everybody's kind of looking around and going, hey, I kind of think this Luther guy's right. Luther gets put on trial. Okay, he is put on trial. The Pope is not there. Some of the Pope's representatives are there. He's put on trial, and he's given a chance to give his side of things, and the Pope's representatives give their side of things. And you can take a wild guess who wins. Okay, it ain't Luther. Luther's excommunicated. What does that mean? You get excommunicated from the church, what does that mean? You get the boot tossed. Okay? You become a heretic. So you are booted out of the church. So Luther is, I mean, how bad does it have to be to get kicked out of church, right? So Luther gets kicked out of the Catholic Church. He could have been arrested. He could have been put on trial for real and then executed as a heretic. But Luther has built up a following, right? And other people start to look around and say, hey, this Luther guy, I like what he's saying. Now, some do it out of religious fervor. They really believe that Luther is right, okay, religiously, okay? Others see this as an opportunity to break away from what some of them consider to be a parasitic church. They have to pay taxes to the church. They have to pay all this money to the church. If I follow Luther and break away, then what? I don't have to do that anymore. So there's some politics involved. There's some religion involved. Yes. So since Luther is booted out of the church, Luther actually has friends that hide him out, and he starts to really create his own faith. And the people that are going to follow Luther are going to be called Lutherans. But the important thing to sort of, after excommunication here, there's a printing press, by the way, I told you about. Luther has a lot of new followers, and they start to organize their own religion. And they are going to become Lutherans. But as a whole, those people that start to consider to break, start considering breaking away from the Catholic Church, we start calling these groups Protestants. Because they are what? Take out the A and T, what do you get? Protest. Okay, they are protesting against the conditions of the Catholic Church. So Lutherans are Protestants. Okay, they are protesting against the Catholic Church. They break away. They organize a new belief system of denomination, and they call themselves Luther. Luther takes for example, Latin Bible, the Vulgate, the Latin scriptures, translates them into German. Why would you do that? Nobody can read Latin. How many people can read German? Especially in Germany, right? What did Luther base the 95 Theses on? His reading of what? Scripture, right? In order to believe, in order to make decisions about your own faith, rather than trusting somebody that tells you the class isn't meeting, what do you have to be able to do? Read it for yourself. And so Luther tries to give them a way of looking at the text. This is not a very peaceful thing. Okay? Don't think that people that are breaking away from the Catholic Church are safe. They're not. Don't think that there's no violence. There is. Okay? So in Europe, as a result of Luther's actions, you start to see religious wars, religious conflicts start to ramp up between Protestants and Catholics. And this will go on from the early 1500s all the way to the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648. There's about 150 years in Europe where there are major religious conflicts between Protestants and Catholics, but between states too, Protestants and Catholics too. All right. So why are we working our way through this? Okay. Why have I spent so much time, okay, talking about the Reformation in Europe? Okay? Because the Reformation spreads. If you guys look up there, you will see two major areas where the Reformation spreads almost immediately. Into France and Switzerland under the influence of John Calvin. I cannot underestimate, or I cannot tell you how important Calvin is to what we'll be doing in the next couple of days. Okay? Calvin is super well educated, trained as a lawyer. He sees everything in logical terms. And so when Calvin becomes a believer in the Protestant faith, okay, he will take a lot of these Protestant ideas out to their logical conclusions. And unfortunately, some of these logical conclusions make us very uncomfortable. One of the most famous ideas that Calvin espouses is predestination. Okay? What does that mean? You ever heard it? Okay? Let me give you an idea. Calvin tells us, look, we've been taught that God is what? Omnipotent, omniscient, right? God knows everything and is all powerful. If God knows everything, then he already knows about you, right? And so, God, for example, already knows before you were ever born whether or not you will receive the gift of salvation. So before you are born, God already knows whether or not you will be saved or whether you will be cast into hell. It is predestined, predetermined. Now, that makes you very uncomfortable because what does it take away from you? It should make you uncomfortable. What does it take away from you? Yes, this concept that we believe that we have, free will. Okay? How can you say that? Okay? How can you say that? I have a choice, right? What does Luther say? No, you don't. Because what? God already knows about what choices you're going to make, right? That takes us right down a rabbit hole, right? Wait a minute. How do you know that you might be one of the ones that has earned salvation? You don't. Now, there may be signs, but you don't. So what? You better live life like you are one of the elect, right? If you don't, you will have a lot to atone for when it comes time for you to meet God. You want to talk about some uncomfortable thoughts here, okay? But some of the groups that come to America will be followers of Calvin. Okay? Their religious ideas trace straight back to Calvin. There's another area that the Reformation spreads. Where? Where's the second place you see up there? England. Oh, thank God. Ding, ding, ding. What did I tell you we got to get to? All right. So, under the reign of Henry VIII, England will leave the Catholic Church. Not Henry VIII. England, the whole country, will leave the Catholic Church. So England as a nation, not a group of people, not a bunch of Protestants running around in the countryside, okay? The whole nation will take itself out of the Catholic Church and create their own Protestant faith, naming it, oddly enough, the Church of England, okay? And they become Protestant. Why? Nobody knows. See, now we get to have some fun. No, Henry does not wake up one day, fall down and hit his head, and have a religious experience like Paul did when he fell off his ass on the way to Damascus. Okay? I can say that. That's in the Bible. Don't find me. Okay? So, no, Henry does not wake up one day and have some sort of religious experience. Okay? This builds for a little while. So why does England decide to leave the Catholic Church? All right, here is a little hint. Okay? You guys had better make sure you take some notes on this and you better understand it because this is the gateway to what happens next. Okay? Even though it's kind of fun to talk about. All right. This guy right here, okay, Henry VIII, is going to leave the Catholic Church. Not because he has a religious experience, but because he needs another. Henry's family is called the Tudors. And they have really only been kings of England for just a few years before Henry becomes king. Henry's father, Henry VII, had fought a war, War of the Roses, to establish his family, the Tudor family, as the kings of England. Henry actually wasn't even supposed to be king. Henry had an older brother named Arthur. So Arthur was supposed and was the next in line to become king. What happens to Arthur? He dies. Okay? And so when Arthur dies, Henry is the next in line and will become the next king. When Henry became king, things were already in motion. Okay? Henry's father, before he had died, had already kind of orchestrated this marriage between Arthur and a Spanish princess named Catherine, right? Catherine of Aragon. And so they were already betrothed to one another, which technically sort of means that they were already married. Okay? So when Arthur dies, they still want that alliance in place between England and Spain. Now remember, England is not Protestant yet. Okay, these are two Catholic nations. Okay, keep that in mind. So when Arthur dies, they still want that alliance in place, and so Henry will marry Catherine, his brother's wife. Okay, so Henry and Catherine will be wed. Okay, and there is the young Catherine. Henry, they'll be married by proxy. You know what that means? You and him get married, okay? But he's in Afghanistan, okay? So I'm his best friend. So at the marriage ceremony, I stand in for him. I said, technically, you married me, but you're really marrying him. Now, that's what marriage by proxy is, okay? But Henry's not even really there when they get married, okay? So Henry and Catherine will marry. They will have several bad pregnancies, okay? But Catherine will be successful in producing one living child, okay? A daughter named Mary. Okay? So they are successful in producing one child, okay? If you look up here, you see where Mary is, okay? So from 1510 until 1518, Catherine had several pregnancies, but the only one that managed to survive was Mary. What? We talking about? Oh, they never. No, we don't know what sex it was. They never said. Okay. All right. Were you miscarriages or like? Yes, miscarriages, stillbirths. Okay, very bad. Okay. So it became pretty clear as you get to 1518 that Catherine was not going to be able to have any more children. Okay. And Henry, in the meantime, has become obsessed really with the one thing that he does not have. What is it? A son. So Henry is convinced that his marriage is cursed. In Leviticus, it says you should not marry your brother's wife. Okay? So he's convinced that his marriage is cursed. He's also convinced that this is the evidence of it. But in reality, he also is obsessed about having a son. Now, in the Catholic Church, what's the Catholic Church's position on divorce? It does not happen. And so, what does Henry appeal to the Pope for? You can't get a divorce, what can you get? An annulment. Okay? Look, my marriage is cursed. Okay? You gotta annul my marriage. What does the Pope say? Nope. Okay? With no possibility of divorce, I want you to think about what Henry could do. He could have Catherine killed, but if she dies suddenly, everybody's going to know that after he's already tried to get an annulment, that what? Something, that he did it. And remember, why are they married in the first place? Because of, a political arrangement, right? So Spain will attack and we'll have a war. So it can't do that. So what's Henry's only option? But that won't produce a legitimate child. He does have illegitimate children. But that means they can't inherit the throne. What? No, can't do that either, because that won't be legitimate. Unless you do what? There you go. See, there's a lateral thinker there. Okay? If I can't get it done this way, I'm going to join these Protestants. I'll create my own church. I'll put me as the head of the church. And then I can do what? Give myself a divorce and marry whoever the hell I want to. Whoa. This is not religiously motivated. Okay? Luther was all about religion. Calvin, all about religion. Henry is all about what? Getting a new wife so that he can have a male child. Okay? Well, we'll get to that. Okay? So now we've got to deal with this marriage thing, which takes England out of the Catholic Church. All right, we'll stop here. Okay. Remember, Wednesday, you guys won't be here, so you'll get to hear the second part of this and what happens to and how this influences the American colonies on Wednesday. On Friday, we'll probably spend a lot of our lecture dealing with the colonies. Okay. So that one will be important. Okay. So I might even have a handout for you guys to do while you look at the colonies, while you watch the lecture. Okay, kind of help you build the notes up for that section. Okay. All right. See you guys. Have a great week. Okay. Make sure that if you're missing assignments, that you go and take care of those as soon as you can. Have a great week. Stay safe. Wear your mask.